I was standing in the cereal aisle at Walmart last month, holding a jar of peanut butter, when I noticed something. The price sticker had a tiny asterisk I had never seen before. Same size jar, same brand, $3 more than March. That sent me down a rabbit hole. I started tracking prices on my phone, item by item, week by week. And what I found was not random. There is a pattern behind why certain cheap foods are quietly disappearing from the cheap category, and most shoppers will not notice until they are standing at the register wondering what happened. This is not about panic buying. This is about seeing the pattern early and acting calm, while everyone else acts surprised later. Stick around, because number 7 on this list genuinely shocked me when I first read the numbers. If you want more of this before it hits the mainstream news cycle, hit subscribe now, because I post these breakdowns before most people even know to look. Let's get into it. Item number 1. Ground beef. Ground beef is the first one, and it surprised me the most because it is such a basic staple. The US cattle herd is at its lowest size in about 75 years. Ranchers cut back during years of drought, and cattle take years to rebuild a herd, not months. That is not a rumor. That is basic supply math. Industry reports are projecting retail beef prices to climb over 10% this year alone, and wholesale cattle prices are already sitting at record highs. This is not a short-term blip tied to one bad season. I checked my own receipts going back to January. My regular 1-pound package of 80/20 ground beef has gone up nearly $1 since the start of the year. I called my local butcher to ask if it was just my store, and he told me flatly that wholesale prices keep climbing every few weeks, and he has stopped trying to predict where it stops. If you eat beef regularly, this is the moment to buy in bulk when it is on sale and portion it into freezer bags. Ground beef freezes beautifully for up to 4 months without losing quality. Vacuum sealing extends that even further. This is not about hoarding. This is about locking in today's price before the shelf tag catches up to the wholesale numbers. Item number 2. Coffee. Coffee is next, and if you drink it daily like I do, this one hits close to home. Coffee has been through one of its most volatile stretches in decades. Tariffs on imported beans, extreme weather in Brazil and Vietnam, and shipping disruptions have all stacked on top of each other. Prices have eased slightly from their peak, but they remain far above historical norms, and analysts openly admit the next 12 months are uncertain. Trade reports show roasters absorbing cost increases for months before finally passing them to shelf prices, which means the retail price you see today is often behind what is actually happening upstream. I started buying whole bean coffee in bulk from a warehouse club instead of small bags from the regular grocery store, and the price per pound difference genuinely surprised me. A friend who manages a small coffee shop told me their supplier changes pricing on almost every new invoice now, something that never used to happen. Buy whole beans instead of pre-ground. They stay fresh longer in an airtight container in a cool, dark cabinet. Stocking 2 or 3 extra bags when you see a sale protects you from the next price jump. This is one of those quiet daily costs that adds up fast if you are not paying attention. Item number 3. Chocolate and cocoa products. This one is going to affect more than your candy bowl. Cocoa prices spiked to historic highs after poor harvests in West Africa, where most of the world's cocoa is grown. Prices have come down from their peak, but they remain multiples above the levels considered normal for the last 2 decades, and manufacturers have been quietly shrinking bar sizes instead of dropping prices back down. Major confectionery companies have publicly said on earnings calls that they expect elevated costs to stick around, even as raw cocoa prices ease, because they are still working through expensive inventory bought at the top of the market. I noticed my go-to baking chocolate bar was smaller than I remembered, so I actually weighed it against an old wrapper I'd saved. It was nearly 15% lighter for the same price. That is shrinkflation happening in real time, and most people never check. If you bake, stock up on baking chocolate and cocoa powder now while pricing is temporarily calmer, and store it in a cool, dry place away from sunlight. It has a long shelf life if sealed properly. Nobody wants to be the one paying double for brownies next Christmas. Item number 4. Olive oil. Olive oil is one that quietly crept up on almost everyone. Mediterranean drought conditions have repeatedly hit Spain and Italy, the two largest olive oil producers in the world, over recent harvest seasons. Lower yields mean less supply hitting global markets, and olive oil does not have an easy substitute at the same price point. Trade data has consistently shown that when a Mediterranean harvest underperforms, the price spike reaches American shelves within a few months, not years, because the supply chain is tightly linked. I used to buy a large bottle without even looking at the price. Now, I actually compare price per ounce between brands, something I never did before. When I asked a local Italian deli owner about it, he said his supplier warned him prices are unlikely to drop back to where they were even if the next harvest is decent, because inventory costs are still working through the system. Buy a larger bottle when you find a reasonable price and store it in a dark cabinet away from heat, since light and warmth degrade it faster. And remember, this is coming up, but the item at number 7 affects even more households than this one does. Don't wait for the sale version of a product that is already becoming a luxury item. Item number 5. Vanilla extract. Vanilla is small on your shopping list, but the story behind it is bigger than people realize. The vast majority of the world's vanilla comes from Madagascar, a single island nation that is regularly hit by cyclones. When a cyclone damages the vanilla crop, global supply tightens immediately because there is no large backup source. Industry buyers have long noted that vanilla is one of the most price-volatile agricultural commodities in the world, sometimes swinging by hundreds of % within a few years, depending entirely on one harvest season. I only realized how fragile this was when I tried to find pure vanilla extract for a holiday recipe and noticed the imitation version had quietly become the only affordable option on the shelf. I asked a pastry chef I know, and she said she switched half her recipes to vanilla bean paste just to manage her ingredient costs. If you bake often, buy pure vanilla extract when it is reasonably priced and store it in a cool, dark spot. It essentially never expires if sealed properly, so there is no downside to stocking a few extra bottles. This is the kind of item that disappears from being cheap quietly, with nobody making an announcement about it. Item number 6. Honey. Honey is another one that connects to something most people never think about: bee health. Commercial beekeepers have reported ongoing colony losses for years now, driven by disease, pesticide exposure, and habitat loss. Fewer healthy colonies means less honey produced per season, and beekeeping is not something you can scale up quickly. Agricultural surveys have repeatedly shown commercial beekeeping operations reporting colony loss rates well above what the industry considers sustainable long-term, year after year. I switched from buying small honey bottles to a larger jug from a bulk retailer after noticing the per-ounce price gap kept widening every time I shopped. A regional honey producer I follow online mentioned that many small beekeepers are exiting the business entirely because the economics no longer work for them. Buy honey in the largest container that makes sense for your household, since it never spoils if kept sealed and away from moisture. This is one of the only pantry items where buying in bulk truly has zero downside. Once local producers start closing up shop, the supply gap does not fill itself overnight. Item number 7. Orange juice. Here it is, the one I told you about. This one shocked me the most because I had no idea how bad it actually was. Florida's orange groves have been devastated for years by a disease called citrus greening, which slowly kills trees and has no cure. Combined with hurricane damage to remaining groves, Florida orange production has collapsed to a fraction of what it was 2 decades ago. Agricultural data shows Florida citrus production dropping by staggering percentages compared to historic averages, forcing many juice companies to import oranges from Brazil and Mexico just to keep supply steady, which adds shipping costs on top of an already shrinking harvest. I grew up with orange juice as a daily breakfast item, and I never thought twice about the price until I saw a carton nearly double what I remembered paying just a few years ago. I looked into it after that, and honestly, the tree disease numbers are worse than I expected. Groves that used to produce for decades are being abandoned because they simply cannot survive the disease anymore. If you drink orange juice regularly, consider buying frozen concentrate instead of fresh carton juice. It is typically cheaper per serving and freezes indefinitely. Stocking a few extra containers in the freezer protects you from the next price jump. This is not a temporary dip. This is a structural, long-term supply problem that is not going away soon. Item number 8. Butter and dairy. Fat butter is one of those items where the price creep happens so gradually you almost do not notice it. Dairy input costs, including feed and energy, have climbed steadily, and butterfat specifically has been in tight supply as demand for full-fat dairy products has grown faster than production. This pushes butter prices up even when milk itself stays relatively stable. Dairy market reports have flagged butter as one of the more volatile dairy categories recently, with price swings tied closely to global demand for butterfat used in baking and food manufacturing. I started buying butter in the large multi-pack instead of single sticks after comparing the per-pound price and being surprised at the gap. A baker friend of mine told me she now watches wholesale butter futures the way some people watch stock prices, because it directly affects her ingredient costs every single month. Butter freezes extremely well for up to a year without losing quality, so buying extra when you see a genuine sale price is a smart move. Just wrap it tightly to prevent freezer burn and odor absorption. Small habits like this add up to real savings over a year. Item number 9. Canned tuna and seafood. Canned tuna is a pantry staple that quietly got more expensive without much attention. Import tariffs on seafood, combined with rising fuel costs for fishing fleets, have pushed wholesale seafood prices higher across the board. Canned tuna specifically relies heavily on imported product, which makes it sensitive to trade policy changes. Industry sourcing reports have noted that seafood importers have been absorbing rising costs for months before passing them along, which means shelf prices tend to lag behind what is actually happening at the dock. I used to grab whatever tuna can was cheapest without comparing brands. Now I actually check the price per ounce, and the gap between store brand and name brand has widened noticeably. A friend who works in food distribution told me seafood contracts get renegotiated more often now than they used to, sometimes every few months instead of annually. Canned tuna has a shelf life of several years unopened, so stocking a case when you find a genuine sale is a low-risk move. Store it in a cool, dry pantry away from temperature swings. This is an easy one to overlook until the price catches up with you at checkout. Item number 10. Rice feels like it should never get expensive, which is exactly why this one caught people off guard. Import tariffs and shifting trade agreements have affected rice pricing more than most shoppers realize, since a meaningful portion of rice sold in the US is imported from specific countries whose trade terms have changed. Domestic rice production also faces its own water and input cost pressures. Commodity trade reports have shown rice pricing becoming noticeably more volatile in recent years compared to the multi-decade stability shoppers were used to. I buy rice in large bags for my household, and I noticed the price per pound crept up gradually over several purchases before I actually did the math and realized how much it had shifted. When I mentioned it to a co-worker who cooks a lot of rice-based meals, she said she switched to buying the largest bag available specifically to lock in a lower per-pound price before the next increase. Buy rice in bulk bags rather than small boxes, and store it in an airtight container to protect against pests and moisture. Properly stored white rice can last years without spoiling. This is one of those items where buying smart today protects your grocery budget for a long time. Item number 11. Peanut butter. Peanut butter is a household staple, and the story behind its pricing surprised me too. Peanut crops are sensitive to weather conditions during the growing season, and recent years have seen tighter supply due to reduced planted acreage in some growing regions, combined with rising input costs for farmers like fertilizer and fuel. Commodity market coverage has noted peanut prices trending upward as farmers shift acreage toward other crops when peanut margins get squeezed, which tightens future supply even further. I always bought the same brand without thinking twice, but recently I noticed the jar size had shrunk while the price stayed the same, which is a classic sign of rising input costs being managed quietly. I asked a friend who works in food manufacturing, and she confirmed that packaging size changes are one of the first moves companies make before an outright price increase shows up on the shelf tag. Buy the largest jar available when you see a real sale and store it in a cool pantry. Unopened peanut butter has a long shelf life, so there is little downside to stocking a couple extra jars. Watch the jar size next time you shop, not just the price tag, because that is where the real story is hiding. Item number 12. Maple syrup. Maple syrup is a smaller category, but the trend behind it is worth knowing. Maple syrup production depends on a very specific freeze-thaw weather pattern in the northeastern United States and Canada. Climate shifts have made that pattern less predictable, which directly affects how much sap producers can collect each season. Agricultural extension reports have documented shorter and less consistent sugaring seasons in recent years, which reduces total yield even when tree health itself is fine. I only started paying attention to this after a maple producer at a farmer's market told me flatly that his season had been cut short again, for the third year in a row. He said smaller family operations are struggling to stay profitable when a bad season can cut their entire year's harvest significantly. Real maple syrup does not spoil quickly if kept sealed and refrigerated after opening, so buying an extra bottle when you find a fair price is a reasonable move. Just check that you are buying pure syrup and not a blended imitation if quality matters to you. Small-scale agricultural products like this are often the first to show supply strain before big commodities catch up. Item number 13. Cinnamon and baking spices. Spices feel cheap because they come in small containers, but the story behind them is not small at all. Cinnamon and many baking spices are grown almost entirely overseas, often in regions affected by both climate volatility and shifting trade tariffs. Because the containers are small, price increases per unit often go unnoticed, even when the percentage increase is significant. Import trade data has shown spice pricing becoming increasingly sensitive to tariff changes, since there is very little domestic production to fall back on for most common baking spices. I actually did the math on my cinnamon jar recently, comparing the ounce price to what I remembered paying a couple years ago, and the increase was much larger in percentage terms than I expected for something that seems so minor. A spice shop owner I talked to said tariff-related cost increases hit his wholesale invoices multiple times over the past year alone. Buy spices in bulk from a warehouse store or a dedicated spice shop rather than small grocery store jars. The per-ounce savings are significant. Store them in a cool, dark cabinet to preserve potency for longer. This is a category where the small container hides a bigger price story than most people realize. Item number 14. Sugar is another baseline pantry item that has quietly shifted. US sugar pricing is heavily influenced by import quotas and tariffs designed to protect domestic producers, which keeps American sugar prices consistently higher and more sensitive to policy changes than global sugar prices. Recent trade adjustments have added additional pressure on top of that existing structure. Commodity analysts have long pointed out that US sugar prices trade at a persistent premium compared to world sugar prices specifically because of this policy structure, and that gap has not been shrinking. I noticed my baking sugar bill creeping up slowly over the past year without any single dramatic jump, which is exactly the kind of increase that is easy to miss until you add up several months of receipts. A local bakery owner told me she has started buying sugar further in advance than she used to, specifically to avoid mid-year price adjustments from her supplier. Buy sugar in bulk bags rather than small boxes and store it in a sealed, airtight container away from moisture. Properly stored, it lasts indefinitely. Quiet, gradual increases like this one are the easiest to miss and the easiest to prepare for. Item number 15. Frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables used to be the budget shopper's best friend, and that is starting to shift too. Rising labour costs throughout the agricultural supply chain, along with higher energy costs for the freezing and cold storage process itself, have pushed frozen vegetable prices up in ways that fresh produce inflation numbers do not always capture. Fresh vegetable prices themselves have also climbed noticeably in recent reporting. Agricultural cost reports have specifically flagged fresh vegetable prices rising well above general food inflation, with some categories like lettuce and tomatoes showing double-digit increases year over year. I used to stock my freezer with the cheapest bags I could find without thinking much about it. Now I actually watch for sales and buy several bags at once when the price drops, because I noticed the regular price creeping upward steadily over the past several months. A grocery store produce manager told me that supplier costs have been adjusted more frequently than usual this year. Stock your freezer with vegetables during genuine sale events rather than buying at regular price week to week. Frozen vegetables maintain quality for many months if kept consistently frozen. This is a category where timing your purchases actually matters more than which brand you pick. Item number 16. Pasta and wheat products. Pasta feels like the most stable pantry item there is, which is exactly why this one is worth watching. Wheat prices are tied to global growing conditions and export patterns from major producing countries, and any disruption in those regions ripples through to pasta, bread, and flour pricing here. Energy costs for milling and transportation add another layer of pressure on top of the raw wheat price itself. Commodity trade coverage has repeatedly shown wheat prices as one of the more globally interconnected food commodities, meaning a drought or export restriction on the other side of the world can show up on your shelf within a season. I buy pasta regularly for my family, and I started noticing the store brand price creeping closer to what the name brand used to cost. When I mentioned it to someone who works in food distribution, they told me flour and wheat contracts have been renegotiated more frequently in recent years than they historically were. Buy pasta and flour in bulk when you see a genuine discount. Both store well in airtight containers for a long time. This is one of the easiest categories to stock up on without worrying about spoilage. Stable feeling items are sometimes the ones most worth double-checking. Item number 17. Cooking oil. Cooking oil is a category most people barely think about until the bottle is nearly empty at the worst possible time. Vegetable and canola oil pricing is affected by both global crop conditions and import tariffs, since a significant portion of cooking oil used in the US relies on imported raw materials or finished product. Energy costs for processing and transportation add further pressure. Trade and commodity reports have shown cooking oil pricing as particularly sensitive to tariff policy shifts, given how globally interconnected the vegetable oil supply chain actually is. I switched from buying small bottles to a larger jug after comparing the price per ounce and being surprised at how much cheaper it was in bulk, which told me the smaller bottles had quietly become the worst deal. A friend who runs a small restaurant told me her cooking oil costs have been one of her most unpredictable line items over the past year, more than almost anything else she buys. Buy the largest bottle that makes sense for your household and store it in a cool, dark place away from heat and light to preserve freshness. Unopened, most cooking oils last well over a year. This is a category where buying smart once saves you from repeated smaller purchases at a worse price. Item number 18. Store brand loyalty as a habit. The last one is not a single product, it is a habit, and it might be the most important item on this whole list. Retailers have been leaning harder into their own store brand products as name brand input costs rise, often producing them in the same facilities as national brands at a meaningfully lower price point. The quality gap between store brand and name brand has narrowed significantly across most categories. Consumer research has consistently shown that store brand products now perform comparably to name brands in blind taste and quality tests across most grocery categories, even as the price gap between them continues to widen. I used to be loyal to specific name brands out of habit more than anything else. Once I started doing side-by-side comparisons on my own kitchen table with pantry staples like canned tomatoes, pasta, and butter, I genuinely could not tell the difference in most cases, and I had been overpaying for years without realizing it. Try switching just 3 or 4 items to store brand this month and compare the results yourself. The savings compound quickly across a full grocery cart, especially as name brand prices keep climbing faster than store brand prices. This one habit alone can offset a meaningful chunk of everything else on this list. Here is the pattern behind everything you just heard. Every single one of these items is tied to something most people never think about, whether that is a cattle herd that takes years to rebuild, a tree disease with no cure, a tariff decision made far away, or a climate pattern shifting slowly in the background. None of this is random, and none of it happened overnight. It built up quietly, one small increase at a time, while most shoppers were only looking at the total on their receipt instead of the price per item. You do not need to panic about any of this. You just need to be the person who notices before everyone else does, buys smart when prices are still reasonable, and stores things properly so nothing goes to waste. That is not paranoia, that is just paying attention. Most people will not connect these dots until they are standing at checkout wondering why their cart costs so much more than it used to. You already know better now. If this kind of breakdown was useful to you, subscribe so you catch the next one before it becomes common knowledge. Drop a comment letting me know which item on this list surprised you the most. I read every single one. And leave a like if you want more of these insider breakdowns, because there is a lot more coming that most people are not talking about yet. Take care of your budget. I will see you in the next one.